Hello, my name is Dan Hennon. Today is February 22nd, 2018, and I'll be providing some updates on the Crowley case investigation. Now, the important information has come to light recently here relating to Kamel's side of the family. Kamel, her maiden name was Alam. The Alams live in Texas, near Dallas, in a small town called Hewitt. And recently, this week, a close family friend came forward and wished to kind of break the ice and open the door to some dialogue, some discussion, and help clear the air on some misinformation. This person's name is Natasha. She is the best friend of Sidra Alam. Sidra is Kamel's sister, So this person has decided to come forward now to shed some light on some things. And what I learned with the discussion with her is, number one, some answers to some questions that we've had for a long time. Number two, some facts. And number three, some background information on the Alam family that I believe will help shed light on some of the scenarios and some of the kind of put things together better. So once again, best friend of Sidra Alam, she made the trip to Minneapolis in October of 2014, and this Natasha was the gal on the phone several times when they were wondering what to do, contemplating to go to the police, contemplating to go to the house to knock on the door. They spent some time going shopping to kill some time. It was a very frustrating and stressful day that time when they made the drive up with Sidra and her fiance at the time, named Vinny. So this person, Natasha, was in communication. I'm going to get right to the point, make this just a quick summary, but I think this will be very helpful, as I've found her information to be extremely helpful hearing this information. This Natasha said that when Sidra came up to get the clothing and start retrieving the belongings and things from the Crowley residence of things that related to Rani and Kamel. One of the things, the two things in particular that she brought up on the Facebook page this week was some articles of clothing, some coats and some boots, and then also some books. We all remember the bookshelf in front of the big picture window there that had all the books on there. David's family, I think, took David's belongings, and then Sidra was able to go through Kamel's, and she compiled the books that were Kamel's, and I believe she dropped a majority off of her educational or textbook reference research books to one of her professors she had. I'm not sure if it was at the University of Baylor down in Texas or the University of Minnesota, where she received her master's degree here in the Twin Cities. She dropped some off for her professor, brought the remaining books home, and she did say that to this day there was some. They did notice on the binding of the book there was still a small blood spatter from the events that day in December of 2014. That would make sense, as the books were there on the bookshelf in the room where three people were murdered. The other thing she said is that there was a long white coat that Kamel had, and then also a brown, like a winter coat, winter jacket type of a thing that was in the closet as well, along with a pair of, I believe, brown boots that were stored in that front closet. In the entryway, when you come in the Crowley home, there's a front closet for coats and things. When she brought those two coats home, Sidra had mentioned that she had washed them or had them dry cleaned, I think, a couple of times, and there's still remaining some small, blood spots were still on those garments. When she posted that on the Facebook page, a lot of people jumped on her back, and even in private discussions with her, I questioned that. I said, remember now, the shootings went on in that main living room. There's no way blood can be on anything in the closet with the door shut. We're still presuming the closet door was shut, as I'm assuming it was. There could be no way blood spatter could get on in anything in that front closet. Now, let's say the door was open, left open, partially open, fully open. Even the trajectory of the three people being shot in that front living room, I don't believe would allow for even ricochet or residual blood to be on anything in that front closet. But Be that as it may, I'm going to be interviewing Natasha here in a couple days on Saturday, and so I'm going to jot down some questions. If you have anything here to ask her, we'll find out and resolve some of these things. The rest of the things that I've gotten from her was all very factual information. This Natasha was best friends with Sidra. They met in middle school in Dallas. She knew Comel, very close with Comel as well. One thing I asked her was, do you know from Sidra, and talking with Sidra, whatever happened to Comel's wedding ring? This was talked about for months and months. If Comel's both hands were missing, and she had a pretty nice diamond ring, a pretty good sized rock on that wedding ring, where did that go? If the dog ate the hands, did the dog eat the ring? Well, did police find the ring? There was no mention of it in the police report at all. And so the first thing is I wondered, out of concern, did they get the ring back? She says, yes, they do have the ring. Comel, because of the size of the ring, she did not wear it on an everyday basis. It was large. It was not an everyday basis type of ring. She kept it in the top drawer of the vanity. And so she kept it in there. That's where it was found, and it was retrieved and brought back home. So it had nothing to do with the shooting or the dog or the hands missing. So we brought some closure to that. She did say that the film crew with Eric Nelson came down to film for the documentary A Gray State down just outside of Dallas. 2 days they spent filming and doing interviews with both Mr. Anjum Alam and Sidra Alam. 2 days of interviews. The only two that came down there to conduct the interviews was Eric Nelson and the associate producer Mason Hendricks, also from the Gray State. Those two came down, performed interviews, and did the filming. She said essentially 2 days worth. Now, when the rough cut came out, I'm not sure of who did see the rough cut or who was aware of the rough cut. The Alams did see the version of the rough cut. When Mr. Alam saw that version and saw the way Eric Nelson was pushing this narrative and pushing it that it was a discredit campaign against David, and rather than an actual investigative documentary, he pulled out, didn't sign the paperwork for the release, requested Sidra do the same thing, and she did. She did follow suit. Neither of them signed off, so they had to pull those and edit those interviews out of the final version of A Gray State. Now, I know for folks who have attended the Gray State viewing, the movie, the one in particular in Minneapolis where they had a Q&A afterwards with Eric Nelson, the director. Eric Nelson said in front of everyone there, he said that they didn't get around to signing the paperwork or filing it, or something didn't get done. He made it sound like it was a technicality that wasn't signed or something that was not approved, and that's why they had to pull those pieces out. Much to the contrary, the Alams were not happy with the view that this documentary took and the narrative that was being steered by Mr. Eric Nelson. So that's news to me. That's very helpful information, because we've never heard of that at all. Now, this gal, Natasha, wanted to come forward earlier, I believe it was a year or even 2 years ago, and asked Sidra, can I come to the Facebook page? Can I announce myself and start bringing some light to this group? And Sidra declined. This was after the time that she had been harassed and bullied on the page herself. Now, recently, she asked again, and Sidra says, yes, I'll give you permission to come on. So that's why she's there. She does have the permission to speak, including this discussion, and the comments and the topics I'm bringing up tonight have been approved by the Alam family to get this information out, and so has the interview scheduled for Saturday. But she did request Sidra's wishes and stay out until this time. I wanted to know more about Mr. Alam, Mr. Anjum Alam. In August of 2015, I spoke with him on the phone and had a very good conversation for about, I'm not sure how long it was, 35 minutes or something. And then I haven't been able to get hold of him since, and he's changed his phone number and he's kind of fallen off the face of the earth. Now he's busy with Naila Alam's illness. She still is in hospice care. She's being fed through a tube, and this is with her Naila Alam's cancer that she has been, and the family's been struggling with, dealing with her health. Now Natasha says, here's this background story on June. This is really what I was interested in myself. His background was very, things didn't add up, things didn't mesh, and I wanted to get some clarification on that, and hopefully by bringing this out, it'll close some questions that we've got from the members of the group as well. She said, he's the most genuine man you'll ever run across. Mr. Alam is the most genuine man you'll ever run across. Hard worker. He came over to the U.S. at age 17 from Pakistan. He was over here by himself. Went to college, put himself through college at the Texas A&M. Very smart. Worked 3 jobs, including at the same time Pizza Hut, KFC, and a laundromat. He put himself through, and a very hard worker, dedicated, and that's just a very strong work ethic. He's always been very busy. Put himself through school, got a degree in computer software engineering, and had a job. Several years later, wanted to be back close near his family, and moved back to Pakistan to be near and closer to the family. There is when he met Naila, Komel's mother. That's where he met her, and so they ended up getting married. He had also jobs and was working in Pakistan as a software engineer. Now he worked his way up to what she calls the top of his field, the top of the top. Very bright, very educated, very smart individual. By this time, he got an offer to work at the U.S. military base in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, as a highly, a top-notch offer that he received to take a job there. The kids were not yet born yet. He was married. The offer he really couldn't refuse. Accepted the offer, went to work there, and I'm not sure if they lived on the military base or not, but the 2 daughters came along. They were born there at the base, at the hospital at the military base, while he was working as a software engineer. And so he advanced, she said he advanced very rapidly in the various jobs that he had and excelled very much so. Now, after some point of working there, also missed the family. Now they had the kids, moved back, spent some time in Pakistan until I think it was when Komel reached the age of 17 or 18, they moved the family to Texas, and that's where they reside now. So the question about the medical insurance was the next thing. I said when he came back, Mr. Alam runs a company called Vista Insurance Company. I said, how does a gentleman and a family not have insurance for someone who's in the actual insurance business? She said they did. They always had insurance. They always had medical insurance. Before or during when Naila was diagnosed in July of 2014, the family was in process of switching over to a different plan, a different provider. They switched over. She got the cancer. The new provider says, well, that's a pre-existing condition. We're not going to cover it. They're not going to cover it. So they had this big battle, this big fight. They says, no, we're not going to cover it at all. So they did have insurance. It's not that they were skimping and there was no medical insurance, it was just that it wasn't covered, that particular cancer. So they had been fighting with this, raising money, raising funds to try to get this squared away. And that's the story on that. I asked this close family friend, did Komel actually, truly convert to Christianity from being a Muslim? She said that was a very good question. None of the family believes that she did. The group and the family in Texas didn't believe she did. Sidra told Natasha that at one point before she got married to David, she said in passing that she was going to convert to Christianity. Sidra didn't believe that, and she just blew that off. And I believe the way that how I sensed it, the whole family blew it off. They didn't really make a big deal about it. I don't even know if Comel mentioned it to the rest of the family, but she did mention it to Sidra that she was going to convert to Christianity. No one knows if she actually did or not, or if anything was official, and there's nothing to actually prove that. So we don't know. I asked her then did she convert more as a reason to get married here in the States to a Christian, or did she really actually change her beliefs? She said she does not know. Sidra does not believe that she knows. There's nothing to prove that she ever did convert at all. So I think for the purpose of marriage, she may have gone through the paperwork or so to get the marriage moved along quickly, but the family does not believe that she ever converted to Christianity ever. But they do not know. It was never brought up. It was never even mentioned, except for that one time that was mentioned to Sidra. And this would have been 5-6 years earlier, because Rani was already 5 years old. So this mention about converting could have been 5 or 6 years in advance. Now, the very last thing I want to mention here tonight on this broadcast is the Surface Pro. Comel and Rani, the first words when this murder-suicide came out, or this pact, or this triple homicide, whatever, is first words that we received is possibly Rani was sitting in Comel's lap watching a movie on the Surface Pro. For those who don't know what the Surface Pro is, it's not a laptop, but it's more of a tablet. It's a computer, kind of like an iPad tablet that you can watch movies and whatnot. Made by Microsoft, just happens to be called a Surface Pro. Instead of being a tablet, it's got two ends like a laptop that fold together and you can open up to watch. That, when the evidence photos came out, showed that Surface Pro was closed and leaning up against the couch. And now we know by the position of the bodies now that no one was watching a movie. The computer was put away. They were not watching a film sitting in her lap. Who knows what really happened. So all we do know is that Sidra, or the Alam family, received the belongings back after police were done. All we know from Sidra is that she said the police were unable to gain access to that Surface Pro, unable to get past bypass the password, unable to log in, unable to get to see any of the access of anything, access the inside of anything on that hard drive, which is strange. Is strange enough. We know the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Unit, that's specifically their job to deal with all the electronic devices, the laptops, the cell phones, and things like that. So allegedly they were unable to get in this. Greg Fernandez did an interview a while back also confirming this, that she didn't know the password, she didn't know how to get in, but she did think, Sidra thought it was quite strange that police detectives or the Electronic Crimes Unit were never able to gain access, didn't feel it was necessary or important, so they just returned it back. Well, Sidra has now stated that she has accessed it recently, somehow was able to access the computer and look at the contents of the computer, which is very important, I think. I'd like to know more what's on there, what the contents are, but Natasha says that they were on there and they found a journal. Now, this is not the David Crowley psycho journal that we've been allegedly hearing about. We don't know if it's online or written. Well, it wasn't handwritten. The one that Comel had, she jotted down her thoughts, her emotions, how she's feeling on certain events, certain aspects of things. Didn't keep it on a daily basis, but when things happened, she jotted them down. I believe this to be a Microsoft Word type of a document that she edited and updated as things happened. I said, how do you know that this was real and legit and the diary or the journal was on the Surface Pro? Because she said she read about some of how she was feeling, her ups and downs, good days and bad. And so when I asked her about this high school 10-year class reunion that David had, that recently came to light, the canceled check that we saw, that him and Comel attended the high school reunion. Well, allegedly, officially, that they were despondent and isolating themselves off and not doing anything during the final months. She says, no, they did go. They did both attend that high school class reunion. Dave, one of the friends or a classmate of David's made a comment to him about the striking beauty or something about how good looking his wife was, what a good job that he did getting married to Kamel. David took offense to that and didn't like that, and this kind of ties back now to this. They've said that he was very jealous, wanted Kamel all to himself, and it did. It had an impact on him, and he didn't really talk to her the rest of the night because of something someone said in passing at the beginning of this reunion. So Kamel made a note of that, and they had some sort of fight about that. So various things like this were in the journal, in the notes, in this so-called diary. So this has nothing to do with the A Gray State documentary, diary, or the journals, whatever they're calling it, but it does appear now that it has come to light that Kamel kept something also on her computer. And like I said, leave your comments below here. I'm going to be interviewing her again on Saturday to get some more and possibly get more information with Sidra. Sidra is since married, has a daughter that's keeping her. She's now got a family, so she's busy with things, and they have moved on with their life from this case. So she has kind of given the green light for this friend of hers to come forward and share some of her some of her thoughts. Hopefully this helps. It certainly helped me with some things. Jot down some notes, leave some comments behind, and we'll be hoping to hear more in the near future. Hello, my name is Dan Hennon. Today is February 28th, 2018, and I'll be providing updates on the Crowley case. Tonight's episode will be focusing on the 10 questions that were asked to Natasha, a family friend of Kamel and Sidra Alam. Now, Natasha was, or is, rather, Sidra's best friend right now, and was actually very close with Kamel also when they were in Texas. So she has allowed us to step forward and help out, be an advocate here for the Alam family. I sent her 10 questions on an email, on a message, and she kindly responded to all 10. And I'm just going to go over those 10 here tonight and add a little value, add a little info background, I should say, to some of these and how valuable these inputs are. Let's get started. Number 1. How did the Alam family receive the rough cut of the documentary? Now this is really a question that was really on my mind because Greg Fernandez and I were in the film and appeared in the film and were interviewed for an hour, probably 2 hours, and appeared in it just a little bit. The question is, Mr. Alam received a version of the rough cut, and the answer here is Mr. Alam and Sidra got an email. So they received an email with a link to the video, and on that linked video was a time limit on how long that video would be available online for them to watch it. Now the interesting thing is there, I never received this link. Greg never received this link, and I'm not sure who else did receive it to be able to give their input. I'm guessing just the parents. So Mr. Alam and Sidra was able to watch it and review a version called the Rough Cut. Not to be confused with the Rise Rough Cut, but just a rough cut of the documentary. I'm assuming then that also Mr. Crowley received it as well. Now, this was 2016, and Kate Crowley had already been dead. She died in August of 2015, so she wouldn't have been involved at this point in time. What she says here on her answer is that obviously the Alams were not happy and told Eric to change the way that he portrayed certain things in the movie. So basically, Eric Nelson then promised Mr. Alam that he would make the changes, but never did so. Therefore, the Alams did not sign the approval to Eric Nelson. This forced Eric Nelson now to go forward and interview a couple of Comel's friends. If without that being done, there would be no side of the Alam family in there, and that would raise almost more questions to the audience watching this. That there'd be no side. That would be the number one flag. So he was able to come back to Minnesota then and interview a couple of her friends to at least make it appear balanced in the documentary. Now, what Sidra said is that the people in Minnesota all got it, and in fact they played the rough cut for everyone in Minnesota. So yes, they all saw it too. Now I'm thinking that Judy Prochnow, the neighbor, said that she had watched this documentary and Mason Hendricks and Danny August Mason and the Crowleys and whatnot. So it sounded like to me that they had essentially a viewing party or something in the documentary. Now I'm in Minnesota and did not receive this invite to go watch this rough cut. So very strange. So it sounds like they all saw it. Dan Crowley Sr. obviously signed off and said that looks good. Basically a movie portraying his own son as a psycho killer, and he said that looks good, move on with it, and he basically gave Eric Nelson the green light to move forward. So that I find very strange as well. Now question 2. My question was, he wanted to remove all the footage. Mr. Alam says, then take all my stuff out of there then if you're not going to do it. And so what in particular didn't he like? Well, what Natasha says here is when he was interviewed, Mr. Alam asked what direction Eric Nelson was going to take this movie in. What direction? And Eric Nelson responded with, he kept saying that there is no direction. The interviewers are going to tell the story, and that his job was simply to compile them to show the truth. Well, now having Greg and I in this movie, and being told by, I think his name was Robert Erickson, was I'm going to call him our handler for this film, as it's obviously a propaganda piece. We were told that they enjoyed watching our YouTube videos and the Facebook pages, and would like to get an honest documentary out on this case to really expose what's going on here, and asked if we'd be interested in being in it, and we said yes. So the portrayal that I received was that this is going to be highlighting all the inconsistencies and anomalies in this case. And what it was throwing David under the bus and making us look like conspiracy lunatics. So it was propaganda. That also explains why then I wouldn't have gotten the invite, or Greg or I either would have gotten a link to this documentary. So yes, it was propaganda. Mr. Alam is right on the money. He didn't like it. He didn't feel it was right, and basically had Eric Nelson change it and get it up to speed. He obviously didn't do that, kept it going, and didn't make good on his promises. The other thing she mentions that he didn't like also that Eric Nelson used a lot of David's footage without approval. And now I know all the footage in there is David's. David took it because I don't believe Comel was filming anything. Now, Eric Nelson must have needed approval to use this, and it was all, the stuff that we saw was in the film. Whether or not there was approval, I don't know. Now, maybe if Dan Sr. didn't give the approval, that wouldn't seem right, but I got a feeling here that this is the video footage of Comel having her episodes and hallucinations or whatnot that may have been, maybe shed her in a poor light that Mr. Alam didn't want that kind of approval to show that footage. which certainly would make sense as well. So I think with answers questions 1 and 2, we get a very good sense of what was going on here in this film and the filmmakers and who was involved and who was producing it and who was interviewed, and the people from Minnesota. They all got a chance to see it, whereas certain people were not allowed to see this evidentiary rough cut. Next item here is number 3, the GoFundMe campaign. This was the FundMe campaign that was asking with the goal of $6 million that Dan Jr. set up. I donated to this and got a response back saying thanks for the donation, and it said it went directly into Dan Crowley Jr.'s bank account. So I found that odd, but now we do have an answer here that they did receive the money. The alums had Dan shut it down after he raised about $8,000. And the question was that I've never received until now is that did they ever receive the money? Did they ever receive those funds? Now that would have to be done, I'm assuming, in the form of a check from Dan Crowley to the alums, and then they transfer that. But it sounds like we've got her word here that they did receive it. In fact, they used it to donate to the Baylor, Scott, and White Foundation, where they were the ones helping out with Mrs. Alam's bill. So I'm glad the donation that I made here for Nyla Alam's medical bills at least got into the right hands. So thank you for that. Number 4, the Surface Pro. Comel's sister Sidra said she had received the computer from investigators once the case was closed. But she also said that she was not able to gain access to it because she didn't know the password. Investigators returned it and said that they didn't know the password. And then they gave it to Sidra, and it was true. She couldn't get in even though. So the question here is, or the reason I asked was, remember the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Unit, which was put together a month before the bodies were found. And they had this new group, group in Dakota County made up of various forensic experts on computers, electronics, cell phones, tablets, and whatnot. They specifically got together to have this group to do exactly this type of thing, and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but we couldn't, we didn't know what the password was." So, number 1, we found that was odd when they've got a specific task force to do this exact type of thing, and then number 2 is Sidra said when she got it that she couldn't get in either. So the question is, she recently was able to access the Microsoft Surface Pro. And so my question was, how did she get it? How did she find the password? How did she get in? Or did she just simply take apart the machine, grab that laptop and attach it to another machine, another computer, and just read the contents? The answer here from Natasha is, she says it's actually quite crazy how that happened. Sidra and I were watching a movie one day, and she randomly jumped out, went and got the Surface Pro and started playing with different various password combinations that she remembered that Comel had used in the past, and then was able to jump on and get access to that laptop. Voila! She was able to get on. Now, Natasha says I was definitely amazed at how she was able to do that. So that appears to be not second or third hand knowledge from hearsay, but she was there right when that happened. That is very interesting, and that is good to know that she was able to get in on that password. Now, the next question, number 5, is because there's no mention of the reports, in the police reports, about Comel having a desktop computer, a laptop. She ran a side business. I was assuming along the way that she probably had a laptop or a desktop somewhere. So my question here is really just getting at, all we hear about is this Surface Pro. Was that really indeed her primary computer? Did she use that as her primary computer? And if so, if that was, then maybe her emails and whatnot would be on that tablet that Sidra now has access to. That's the question. The answer is Sidra was not able to access any of her emails because they were all logged out. And the password she used to get in on the Surface Pro didn't match any of her emails. So just to clarify here, the password that Sidra used to gain access to the Surface Pro was just being able to log on to get the main screen up, much like a Windows login to get onto the computer, just to access the home screen and the desktop. My question then was, if she had a program, for instance, and my assumption here was that she was using something like Outlook, a third-party email software that compiled all of her emails together, that she would be able to see the latest email sent, the latest email received, to kind of get a time frame on Comel was doing on the last days to kind of help the timeline along. Now, Natasha mentions here that they couldn't get into the emails because they were all logged out and didn't know the password. So what this alludes to me is that she's talking about an online Gmail account or a Google email account, Yahoo type of account. Those accounts to me are on the web. Any computer you need to go to, you can just log in, whether it's at a library or at home, log in under her account and just access that. That she could have done on any computer. We didn't need the Surface Pro to get that, to answer that question. I was wondering more, and I should have made it clearer, did she use a program like Microsoft Outlook where the actual emails are stored on the hard drive locally, actually downloaded from the web when you retrieve the message, and they stay on your computer? So I don't believe that she's got Microsoft Office or Outlook loaded. Now, we do know that she used Microsoft Word, but it appears that Comel used online emails. And this emails is plural. What Natasha writes is that they couldn't access any quote, any of her emails. So this alludes to the fact that Comel had multiple email accounts, Gmail accounts, Yahoo accounts, MSN, what have you. And so that may have been the need because she had the KC Cakes business, the other nutrition business, and other things. But I'm not sure if she had multiple emails. It would be nice to see what those multiple emails accounts were. But because they're web-based or online-based, she was unable to get any of those. Next question is number 6. This relates to a journal that was found on the Surface Pro. I was asking Natasha here if this was a Word type document, an actual a program that she typed up, and if so, what was the name of it? What were the dates? When did this file get created? And this is kind of getting into, if we found a journal on her computer, what were the dates? Was it when they first got married? Was it when Randy was born? When was she making these entries? When they had problems in the relationship, maybe perhaps problems in the marriage? And I wanted to kind of get this narrowed down. Now, we do know on the police reports that an online journal was used, like day one, that David had used. David started one, I think, in May and ended it in September, and that was actually online. Once again, you wouldn't need the laptop or the computer to get to the online. You'd go to the URL address, go to that web page, log in, and see what was out there. And so the answer here shows that it was not an online journal. It was a doc file, Word document file with a DOC file name extension. Comel actually typed it up. She named it Eating Disorders, which leads you to believe that she was hiding it from David. That would make sense. Now, the first entry was on July 19th, 2014. This is interesting because my first question was, when did these journal entries start? What year? And now, remember, they died in 2014, so she started this in July, so it was less than a year. We're talking 6 months here is all that she used this journal, maybe even 5 months. So this wasn't a long time journal that she had used over the years, addressing concerns, wanting to leave the marriage, what have you. This was actively running right up to the very end. So, and it seems to me that she used this, the very first date was July 19th. So it appears that she went in and created a file to start journalizing her emotions with going through her mother's recent announcement in July of having a cancer. And at that time, and perhaps it was a terminal cancer even back then. Whatever it was important enough to Comel that she start creating a journal to start to dialogue and to jot down how she was feeling at the time. And it says here, when she was feeling confused, struggling to understand, going through emotions, whatever was his mother's sickness. Remember, they went back and forth on telling Nyla Alam how to treat the illness as well. How to treat it. Do not get the chemotherapy. And so Nyla went along with Mr. Alam and decided to get the chemotherapy. So that caused some issues then as well. So it was her writing emotional types of things that was going on. Also her feelings toward David. It says here David was alienating himself from the outside world. And so this we know in the later months, starting in October, when David was pulling himself away from the Gray State team. I think this is when he was realizing the snakes in the group and was going through legal process to get Danny August Mason off the team with his attorney, with his lawyer, and pulling himself out and basically rebuilding an entire new team. It was at this point, too, when he was already had this contract of the $30 million deal, according to the Michael Entertainment Group. So he was doing a lot of things, and I think he was also perhaps sheltering himself and Comel from the outside world that was trying to get access to this cash and the people that were money hungry on the coattails. So she would write various things like this. It mentioned that she had a relationship with David. She couldn't stand to sleep in the same bed with him. Was not the same man she fell in love with, and this would possibly make sense. This was 5 years later. He was busy doing his thing. She was busy doing hers. And they were going through some arguments and some fighting. They were working on communication to get some things better. Later it says that she had some communication with, or messages in the October-November time frame. Her last post was November 22nd. She wrote that David didn't want her having a Facebook anymore. And I think this would potentially tie back into, it alludes here to him trying to be controlling and manipulative. That could certainly be the case, but looking to try to shelter and shield from this outside forces here trying to get access to this movie, the access to the script, the access to the project, and whatnot. And we do see her Twitter account goes down at this time, around this time. Her Facebook account goes down. This explains because we never knew why she stopped posting. And it didn't just stop posting. She actually deleted it. Goes on around the discussion on November 20th. Even the fiancé, this is Vinny now, Sidra's fiancé Vinny logged in and it actually said the account didn't exist. So they knew that it was shut down, not just blocked, but her page was actually shut down. So we don't know why he wanted to delete it, but we can only guess. And then it's a post here that goes on to the next pages too. Handwritten documents are easier to tell apart. Once again, this was typed, so the purpose of this is people will come back now, I believe, and question and say, did she really type it? You know, anyone could have typed it. It's a conspiracy. Someone typed it. But after reading it, they said that it obviously was her writing it and the emotion she was going through. So I believe that is true. What Natasha did then also to help out for those non-believers is that she did add a scanned image of one of the pages showing Comel's handwriting, just to bear, show truth that it was indeed that going on. Was this journal number 7 turned over to police to get their thoughts on it? There was no reason to turn over the journal. If anything, the journal shows how strained the relationship was and shows mental abuse and manipulation by David. Nothing turning over to the police would accomplish anything different. Number 8. Number 8 here talks about when the investigation was over, the Alam family received a cell phone. This question relates to when they received the cell phone, the SIM card inside that phone was missing. It was questioned when they received the phone back, why would the SIM card be missing? And so we found that out just recently. This, once again, is 3 years later. She was able to contact the investigator, ask where the card was, and he said, in fact, it was taped inside the manila folder. It was contained in a small Ziploc baggie. She did later find it, put that back in, and so they did have it. Now, it goes on to say that she was never able to access that phone, that this is Sidra. Mr. Alam also then took it to Pakistan in hopes to get into it also, but was unsuccessful at that. So it sounds like to this day they were unsuccessful to get at it. But the point being here, they did receive that SIM card back. There was some questions among the group. Why did police return that phone with a key piece of evidence missing? That's not the case. We now have closure on that. Now, he does say he still hopes to get into it one day. Now, I'm not an iPhone person, but does that mean that that phone does not even turn on, power up, or anything without that SIM card, or without the SIM card attached does that mean that it doesn't bring up the personal information relating to the billing, who it is, the address, and their information? The importance, I think, of that phone is such that it wouldn't take much to bring a investigator in or hire someone to get that information off. Another question would be this. This is for the Alam family. They could certainly contact back the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Unit that looked into this phone and got the information off of it, and look for some help for pointers to get that information back if they're doing something wrong, perhaps. Number 9, the question is, in the documentary Gray State, it appears that Comel witnessed some paranormal activity in their Apple Valley home, perhaps even in their previous apartment. Is this something they ever mentioned? Now here we get the answer on number 9, saying that yes, the sister Sidra herself did experience something in that apartment one night, and Comel had mentioned having dreams about David, etc. And so they had, before they moved into their home, was living in an apartment. And so Comel had paranormal activity to some extent. I don't know how large or how small, but when Sidra was there visiting, she also did itself. That would relate, I'm guessing, to something possibly in that apartment or at that property or location. Typically something like that wouldn't follow you to another home, to another property, although it appears that something did, or she just had it happen again. That I found very, very interesting. She did see activity in that apartment. Sidra says here on the answer to that they joked around, they didn't take it seriously, and thought it was something with their subconscious, but she never mentioned anything else. And the very last question, number 10 here, is did Comel have prior experience of paranormal activity before meeting David? Did Comel have a gift for clairvoyance, visions, something like that? And this, the relevance here of this question is, was it something after they had met David, or was it something that she had her entire life? Now, we get the answer here that she's never mentioned any experiences with this prior to David. That doesn't mean that she didn't, but it sounds like when she mentioned it to her sister Sidra, it was while she was married to David. So very, very interesting there with that information. And I got a hunch too. It was something with Comel had. She seemed to be a very bright-minded, open-minded, and very open that way for things like that. But anyway, that's the update. That's the 10 related questions and the answers. Please feel free to leave your comments below. Thanks again for listening.
Hi YouTube, it's Catherine Michelle. Sorry I've been gone for a while, but to be honest, I've been just like really lazy lately. I've been doing a lot of research and reading, but I haven't been doing videos because, well, I've been binge watching Dexter on TV. So there's a plug for Dexter. But anyway, today we're going to talk about the position of Kamel's hand in the sketches. I'm going to put back up the two sketches that were in the previous video. The first sketch being one that was recently given out as part of an FOIA that Greg Fernandez Jr. was able to obtain, which is different from the sketch that was provided in the first set of 400 plus pages. And also in the description of how her body was found. And you will notice that depending on who's writing the report, you will see bodies were moved. Now, the first responding officers, I am still working on that. I'm working on who the first responding officers were, and then who next showed up inside, and comparing their visual of what they saw with the other person's visual of what they saw. And in between, which is probably highly likely, they allowed other people in, but one of the police officers, if not more than one, moved the bodies. There's no other explanation for how it was. But go ahead and take a look at the two sketches, and then we're going to talk about the body positions. Okay, as you saw in the first one, I'm going to go with the original one, the first one. You clearly see Kamel's left hand, arm, well, her hand was missing, but at this point they didn't know. Because in their first description, they said that she was missing one hand that they could tell. The left is underneath the abdomen. Now, there is no way that Paleo could have gotten to that hand. It's impossible. It's underneath her abdomen. Her body was not moved by that dog. So that means the only conclusion that can, is the hand was missing before she was placed in that position, which then means the dog didn't eat it. So where's that hand? Where are all the bones to that hand? To 3 hands that are missing. No, I will never buy the story that the dog ate all those bones. There's just, the feces, as we know, were not tested. The dog's stomach contents were not tested. He wasn't x-rayed from what I can tell. And if they have, they're not releasing that information. And there just is no proof that the dog ate these. There's a couple of spots in the house where it looks like maybe he ate some of it, probably because he was licking it. Because I could swear there's one, and we'll cover that in the dog feces video, but there's one spot where it looks to me like vomit and not dog poo. But the rest is normal looking dog poo. And most of it, as you will notice, will be downstairs, and it's not a lot, And we'll go through all those. Okay, I need to see on topic. We're going to stick with the position of the hand today. So if Paleo couldn't get to Kamel's left hand, and her right hand and what was left of her head was close to the couch on the floor, how did that leave room for the dog to be able to get to that hand? If it's going to be tugging on a hand, her arm would be flopped out in a whole different direction. It's not. It is lying straight up this way. She's face down, straight up, hand missing, couch maybe here. How did the dog get to her head? Her body isn't moved. This is, people keep saying that dogs do eat their owners. Yes, they do. And loving dogs do eat their owners. That is not anything that could be contested because it's fact. It's what dogs do. I am saying that Paleo did not do all this damage that was done to these 3 bodies. And it's interesting to note that only certain parts of their body are missing. And also you will notice the position of Rania. At first, she is lying between her mother's legs. And then in a photo, it shows that her body has been moved and placed on top of her leg between her mom and her dad. Now, whichever officer, whichever one of you guys moved that little girl, you disgust me. That is appalling how you left her body and then took a photo of it. That is so disrespectful of that little girl. You know, I keep trying to give you guys the benefit of the doubt because you only had 6 murders in 13 years, that you were pretty much freaking clueless, although you had at your disposal huge departments. Apple Valley's not that far from Minneapolis. Hennepin County is huge. You had at your disposal people who could have helped you figure this out, but you didn't do it. Why? Why? You can't explain yourselves, but y'all shut down. Nobody wants to talk about it. When somebody calls your office and says, hey, there's new information, they get slammed and shut down saying, the case is closed, we're not opening it. Why? Are you afraid they're going to find something? We've already found it. We have found, and I have more on my list of inconsistencies, by the way. We are down to 39 at this point, and I haven't even, I'm not even through the reports. But okay, again, I digress. Back to the pictures. Now, remember, Kamel is laying this way, face down, left hand under her abdomen, arm up like this, couch like right here, roughly right here. David was to the left, and then Rania was initially found between her mother's legs, who were spread out. And then she was lying, I believe, on her left side. Don't quote me. I'll need to go back and look at that. I'll look at the sketch, but you'll see in the initial position of her body compared to where then they decide to make it the official report on the body positions was after they were moved. And then one of the police officers were one of the ones who pushed up David's sleeve to see his tattoos. Now, I don't know if that's protocol. I don't know if they had the right to do that at that point before any of BCA got there or whatever, because BCA gets there and in their report, they state that his arm sleeve was already rolled up and then they're looking at tattoos. So how do we know that these officers were even wearing gloves? We have a gun that was moved. They cleared the scene. There's nobody there. They shut it down. Why did they move the gun? There was no reason to move that gun. They had officers outside. They were inside, clearing it room by room and floor by floor. That gun posed no threat, but yet now we don't even know what the position is. The gun is located, according to their sketches, anywhere from a few inches to a foot to the south of David's hand. A few inches to a foot? That's quite a distance. Again, I digress. We have to look at this logically. And I know so many people keep saying that they see nothing out of the ordinary. And I don't see how they can't see out of the ordinary. How did the dog get to her hand? How? Explain that aspect to me. It can't be explained. The dog did not eat her left hand. It was missing prior. So anyway, there's just so much on this case. And it's heartbreaking. And this isn't the only case, unfortunately, that is treated this way. You know, I've been written to emails, people write to me, which is great. I appreciate it. Thank you. But some are officers, some are medical people, some are people who knew the family, some are people who were clients of the family. And especially the officers. Some of the officers are saying, oh, this is exactly what it looks like. You guys just don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, but I'm presenting to you what doesn't fit. And then they don't have an answer. A body doesn't just move itself. A hand doesn't just, after a dog decides to take it, when her left arm is actually, David's legs are close to her arm and her hand is underneath her abdomen. Like the dog digs in there and just grabs a hand and then puts the arm back, and then let me take just this hand, and somehow with the couch this close, I'm going to get in and I'm going to gnaw up a head. Hard bones. Would it be so much easier to get to other areas of her body that are exposed if the dog indeed were to be doing this? And then I spoke with coroners who stated that in order for her larynx to be gone, her hyoid bone to be gone, remember, she's face down. That dog would somehow have to be able to get its muzzle, and I know this is gross, so understand, but what's left of her head, the dog would have to dig its face down into that open area to get to that hyoid, to get to all that neck tissue. But there's no proof on that dog that there isn't any matted blood on his fur. There's no odd positioning of the head that shows anything like that happened. So this tells you that all of these injuries occurred prior to body placement. And again, let's go back. There is no high velocity blood spatter anywhere. Not in any of the pictures that I have seen. And they have sent photos of every single room in that house. Every room. You can look at those walls, you can look at the ceiling, you can look at the floor. There is no high velocity blood spatter, which is what you would get from gunshot wounds. Now, that tells you, A, they were not killed in that house or in those rooms, or B, something was placed over their heads, or C, the room was covered in some type of protective layering before all of this began. This is not, and if David was on this murder-suicide mission, why would he go to all that trouble? And people are saying that he was despondent and he was upset and crazy. Go back over my video that I did of his last email to Jason Allen. That's not the rantings of a crazy man or someone who's depressed or someone who's psychotic or someone who's on the verge of breaking. There are lists in his house that talk about where he's taking Gray State in 2015. Not people who go around committing murder, suicide don't plan for the future. There are notes where they talk about how much they love each other. Not done by someone who commits murder-suicide. It just isn't. And a suicide note that was typed on a screen that anybody had access to, including the police officers? Where's the proof it was written by David? They have none. There's no proof. And again, I want those police officers, I want that medical examiner, I want you guys all to explain to all of us how you came to your conclusion, how you can sit there and say paleo ate those body parts, only specific body parts, which would all contain evidence of abuse and torture. The neck, the head, and the hands. We know no other body parts were hurt, but what is missing? The neck, the heads, and the hands. Unfortunately, they did leave behind a fractured rib on Rania. You cannot convince me, with as much as David loved his little girl, loved that family, loved his wife, that he would fracture his little girl's rib. I'm not buying it. Do I see other people that are involved doing it? You darn right I do. These people who are jealous, these people who were mad because David was distancing himself from them. He was taking back control of his project because they were trying to take control. And now they're claiming that they have rights. Who is it? I'm not sure which one it is, but his dad is also one of them. If your name is not legally associated with that project, which it was not, you do not maintain those rights. They're not passed down. David didn't leave a will stating, at least you haven't provided one, where he hands over artistic authority and rights to anyone. Those rights legally remain David's for the next, I thought it was 50 years, but it turns out to be 70 years. Don't think we won't be watching. And if I see anything on that, if I see you guys come up with anything that all of a sudden starts to come on TV, I'm going to challenge you in a court and in the public to prove that you have copyright and that David handed it over. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the threats. I'm tired of people thinking that you can do whatever you want. Whatever happened to this family is horrible. You found an easy scapegoat, David. You have no proof it was him at all. None. No gunshot residue on his hands, no gunshot residue on his clothes, no gunshot residue on the floor, nothing. No gunshot residue was tested or found. Maybe, I don't even know if he tested for it. Not on Kamel, not on Rania, and in fact, they couldn't even find it on their head wounds. Not even on Rania's head wound. What does that tell you? He did not do this. Look at the list of inconsistencies. Look at this list of people who knew him, who all had something to either do with, knew him, had an investment in this entire project. I have cleared, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the only two people I have cleared are David and Kamel. I can find nothing that gives motive for either of them to do this. I find motive, opportunity, and everything else with several others that knew him. Motive means an opportunity, I think is what it is. And then you have your other little people who want their 15 minutes of fame or whatever, who keep injecting themselves and creating a lot of chaos. Toss them aside. They're not worth the time or energy. But again, remember, look at, I'm going to put those two slides up one more time, two pictures. Look at the body positions and explain. Police officers of Apple Valley, Minnesota, please explain how her hand, and the ME, Dr. Lelinski, explained to me how a body that is placed like this, I see most of the head, here's the couch, close to where the head should have been. If her head truly was there, it probably would have been touching the couch. But you have that, and then the hand that's underneath the abdomen. How did that hand go missing? Hi YouTube, it's Catherine Michelle. Today I had a meeting with Dr. Leon Kelly from the El Paso County Coroner's Office. He's a medical examiner and he helped me to understand the autopsy reports. We didn't discuss everything in them, but we discussed a few topics that we will be going over in a minute. However, he did ask me, though, he was kind of uncertain as to why. He asked me, he's like, well, why are you researching this? He goes, what got you interested? And I said, well, I had been watching a YouTube video, caught my attention about 4 months ago, and I said I just started really digging into it. And he's like, so that's it. He goes, let me get this straight. He goes, you saw a YouTube video, and then you just took it from there. And he says, do you know anybody in the case? And I said, no. I said, I don't have a monkey in the circus. I don't care if he's guilty or if he's not guilty. I said, just after reading the reports and putting everything together, I can't see that he's guilty. And I said, that's right. I just saw a YouTube video and it caught my attention, so I decided to start researching it. And so far, these are my notes so far, just so you can see what I've been doing. And this is not even all of the reports yet. That's only about half of the available reports. And I saw the adding to this binder. And and he asked then what my experience has been. So I figured, most of you know that I was an EMT. I went to nursing school. But what a lot of you don't know is that research has been a passion of mine for a very, very long time. One of the biggest cases, I guess you could say, I did research on was on the Robert Logan and Mike Logan case. A book was written about their convictions as murderers, and that book was called Evil Intentions by Ronald J. Watkins. Now, how did I get to come to know them? My mother married Robert Logan, and at the time I had just had a book published, and it was an intrigue. They call it romance intrigue, but for me it was mainly intrigue novel. But you can't, if publishers want to publish it, you have no say where they're going to put it. So anyway, when they found out that I had written a book and had it published, then they wanted me to look into their case. So I bought the book, Evil Intentions, and I started reading it. And again, a whole lot in that book was just like, okay, how they investigated it didn't make sense, didn't make sense. And again, I didn't care. I had no allegiance to either one of these guys, zero. I mean, they were in prison for murder. So, and even if they weren't, if they were still on trial, just because my mother was married to one of them, does not mean, again, it would be, I'm going to take my mom's side. That's not how I operate. And in fact, I've even turned my own brother in when he stole merchandise or equipment from a college. I have no allegiance to anybody once they do something wrong. Right, wrong, or indifferent. If you're wrong, I'm not going to be your buddy to hide your crime. So, and with the Logan brothers' crimes, they both were convicted. Robert Logan has since been released from prison. Mike Logan, who I believe it was Mike Logan and Jesse Gillies who were the main characters in the book Evil Intentions. Mike will never get out. He has a life sentence. Jesse Gillies was executed. And I spent 4 years researching that, making multiple trips down to Arizona. They were to the different prisons. They weren't always in the same prison, so I would have to make trips and get special permission, because down there, if you have one family relative on an inmate's visitation list, you can't have another one. So I had to write in advance and get special permission, and I had to tell them what I was doing. And then again, you had to get permission to have pencil and paper, because those things are not allowed. So I spent 4 years researching these crimes. Now, a lot of the inconsistencies I found and the lack of investigation on the part of the Arizona Police Department, it was appalling. They did a really poor job. However, what they did get right, these guys were guilty. Guilty as the day is long. And they both admitted it. But they were looking for an easy way out, and they were hoping that I could get Jesse Gillies off or get his sentence reduced, because he was sentenced to death. So the day came when the state attorney's office contacted me and asked me for my research, especially where it was referring to Jesse. And that was really difficult for me. Not because I didn't want to share it, but because I told them, I said, what I have is not going to help your client. And I don't want to feel like I'm going to be responsible. Even though I knew I wasn't responsible for his death sentence, I didn't want to be like, he had one last-ditch effort, and they were looking for my material. And I kept saying, please don't, this is not what you want to see. But they insisted, so I sent it to him. And about a month later, he was executed. So it took a long time to deal with that. And the hard part was knowing he was guilty and what a horrible person he really was. Not nice. But, long story short, my research days go way back. And so when I find something, I just don't go willy-nilly. Oftentimes it'll seem like I'm going in circles because that's what I'll do. I'll find something, go, wait a second, something here isn't sitting right. I'll research that, come up with a different idea. And then and I keep going until finally everything is condensed into the best answer that can be proven. What you think you know doesn't matter. It's what you can prove. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. He asked, so there's a little bit more of my background. And the last job I had, I did a lot of research at my job, and it was a government contracting facility. And so I did a lot of research for them as well. So I have a real different way of researching, and it may not agree with what everybody says. And when I come out with something, that's why I say at this point, this is what I think, this is what is making sense to me. And then it'll come back later when I get other people's information. Like today, there's going to be some changes because of what Dr. Kelly, how he explained to me the reports. And I have no problem with that. I don't understand everything, and it's good to get somebody's opinion who deals with all this stuff. So, what I spoke with Dr. Kelly today about, I asked him his background, and he has been a medical examiner from 2007 until present. He got his degree at Indiana University, and he's done right around 4,000 autopsies in his life. He specializes in strangulation and sudden infant death. He does not have a forensic background, although he understands some of it. It's not his core background. So he was able to help me understand some things, but he couldn't explain everything. What I appreciated about him is he said, well, this is how I understand it, but there's not enough information, and my opinion doesn't count, which is true. Our opinions don't count. And so I asked him if he had, and then the first thing I gave him were the autopsy reports of David, Camille, and Renaya. And that's all he read at first. He read those, and then I showed him a photo. And so I asked him, I said, do you have experience with small to medium-sized dogs scavenging on human remains? Sorry about that. And he said, yes, a lot of experience in that area. And I said, would you conclude a dog ate the hands of a victim if the arms are located under the body with no signs of the body being moved by the dog to gain access to the hands? And I was reading this from the police report. And he said he would not make that determination. He said because there's not enough information to interpret. He says, the way I was reading it, the hands are like this. He says the hands could have been like this. They could have been like this. He said there is not enough information to make that determination. I said, okay, or to interpret in that way. I said, okay, makes sense. And I said, and if dogs are chewing, I go, are there usually teeth marks on the bones and skin? And he said, at the end of the skin, no. But on the bones, he said, not necessarily. It would depend on how the dog scavenged, how fresh the bones were, and how long the body had been decomposing. So again, it was another one of those, it's a supposition, not necessarily something he could answer yes or no in this case. Then we talked about, I showed him the photo, and I said, if you walked in fresh to the scene, what would your first initial gut reaction be? And he said, my first thought would be, where's the dog? So he said that he truly feels like the dog did scavenge and did eat some of these body parts. He doesn't know if it was all of it. Again, there's just not enough information, and I haven't seen all of the photos. He said he would have to see the photos on exactly how those bodies were laying. But right now with what we have, he said there's just not enough information. And then I asked him, and I also asked him, I said, well, I'm still trying to find that report. I know I read it several times where they state the dog was thin and dehydrated. So I asked him, I said, could a dog be dehydrated if it had been sustaining itself on human flesh? And he said, yes, it could be dehydrated. So that was helpful to me. And then I said, how far advanced is decomp if the internal organs can be weighed and measured? He says, as long as there's some kind of fluid, if they're still there, they will be taken out. If they have to be scooped or whatever, then they're measured. And it also depends on what the moisture content is of not only the room, but of the body and how far is decomp. And then I asked him, I said, I was told lividity can't be discerned once a body is refrigerated. And I said, is that true? Because I did get that from a deputy coroner from another state. I asked them about this. And they emphatically stated that once refrigeration happens, it changes the body and how the decomposition is reacting. He said in his experience, though, it's the opposite. He said, that the line of lividity will always be present. He said, as the body decomposes, blood and liquid is what leaks through, and lividity is blurred. So you might not be able to see it as well, but he says it's there, I guess. Now, this is me putting words into his mouth. This is what I understood him to mean. So as they start to do an autopsy, as they're cutting through, you might not be able to see it due to the decomposition, the marbling, and the slippage. But I'm going to assume that once they start to cut, then you might be able to see the line of lividity somewhere on that. But he says it depends. But he said usually it's there, but it's going to be blurred, so you have to know what to look for. And then I said, can you determine approximate time of death with a last date known to be alive, the decomposition, and the room temperature? Because they were stating that the Crowleys died approximately 3 weeks before they were found, and so on and so forth. And he said no. He said no one can. A very rough estimate, but no one should determine. However, looking at the decomposition from the photos, he says his rough guess would be that they were not dead for 3 weeks, that they were only dead from a few days to a week. That is what the decomp process looked to him, only to that stage. He was very, very clear that he does not feel that those bodies were laying there for any longer than a week, which is interesting. I found that really interesting because everything states that the bodies had been there for 3 weeks. And I even told him that the glass door was cracked 1/4 of an inch, that the heat was set at 68, and all of that. And he goes, well, that can matter. However, the rate of where they were, the body with the marbling, and you could still see, and even though there was some mummification of the hands and feet of the feet that were bare, he said no. In his professional opinion, it was no more than a week. And then I was talking. Then I brought up the subject of the gunshot wounds about being indeterminate, and I said, is the distance considered indeterminate in a gunshot wound to the head when stippling and gunshot residue is missing? Yet there's a circular impression around the gunshot wound. He stated he doesn't know what the report means by impression. He said it could my notes, my handwriting is very sloppy, just so you can see it. I'm having a hard time reading it. He says he does not know what the report means by impression, could be due to the weapon or could be due to swelling of the tissues due to decomposition. So he said, again, they should not have used the word impression because there's no, he said sometimes as the tissues swell around a gunshot wound, that tissues can look like an impression, but that doesn't mean there's an impression there. It's just often due to decomposition. So he said he wouldn't say that. By what he read, he felt that was not worded correctly. And then I said, would a circular impression around a gunshot wound be indicative of a silencer? He said, not necessarily. Again, not enough information. He said, could be, but that doesn't mean it was. And then I said, what does the description of decomposition tell you about the deaths? Who died first? Was there significant time between the deaths? And he said, there's no way to tell. He just said that they, let me think. I don't want to put words into his mouth. we might not have discussed that any further, so I'm going to leave it at that. He just stated that there was really no way to tell, but that they were all dead and dead for about a week. And so I asked him how mummification is influenced, and he says it's influenced by the environment as well as what the body part is resting on. Like if, and he showed me a photo of a body that had mummification of one hand, but the other hand looked, well, almost normal. If I saw that hand, I would go, okay, that's a dead hand. But anyway, there was a distinction between how the two looked. One didn't have mummification, one did. And he says that was due in part because of where these hands were resting. If it's like laying on a carpet where there's more heat going to be absorbed, the mummification process will happen faster. Whereas if something is either like someone's wearing socks or shoes, or if they're laying on a tile or a bare floor, then it's going to take longer to mummify. So that's why, probably why, there's really no definitives, but probably why David's feet in his hand and then little Renaya's hand that was resting on the floor were mummified, and then why Kamel's feet were not. What else did we talk about? We talked about a lot of stuff. I have notes everywhere. Let me go here. And at first he was, when he's reading the reports and we're just going over the cursory part, and he started laughing. He goes, "Why are you even looking at this?" He goes, "It seems to me that the guy did it." And I said, "I agree. At the cursory level, that's what it looks like." I said, "However, when you start looking at things that don't make sense," I said, "you have neighbors stating that they heard 3 gunshot wounds. There were 6 casings found. And when you look at the gun, only 3 shots fired." And then I said, because he asked too about the gun, he says, "Were his prints on the gun?" And I said, "Yes, his and his daughter's prints were found on the gun." I said, "However, on the gun safe, only the wife's prints were found." And he's like, "Well, that doesn't make sense." And I go, "No, it doesn't." And then I showed him the notes, the submit to Allah now. And I know some people keep saying Alan, and I don't see an N there. I see an H. But I can't get a clear enough picture of that. You may be correct. It may say Alan, but it doesn't look like Alan, especially with what was written on the wall. And he'd asked about that too. He goes, "Well, what's that writing on the wall?" And I showed it to him. And then I showed him David's handwriting. I showed him Dan's handwriting, and then I showed him what was written on the notepad and then what was written on the wall. And he's like, "Well, that's kind of curious." I said, "Exactly. It's not David's handwriting." And then what else did we talk about? Oh, the footprints, the supposed footprints. And I said, "Could you please take a look at this?" So he's looking at them, and I said, "Can you tell me why in these photos it's only the right foot, and that's the only foot that, if it is a footprint, some of them actually look like a handprint, but I don't know." And again, he's like going, "Well, that doesn't make any sense either." And I said, "I know." I said, "Now do you see why? Do you see why I'm continuing to investigate this?" And he's like, "Well, yeah." And so by the time I spent about an hour with him, wasn't enough time. We didn't get enough time to go over everything, and he did the best he could answering the questions I had. But by the time I left, excuse me, throat's dry, he had more questions than answers, just like we all do. So he went from at the very beginning, when he first just read the report and saw the picture, to, "Well, why are you investigating this? Because this could be what it is," to after I started showing him the police reports and then the BCA DNA reports, to he was like, "Huh, okay, this doesn't seem right." I said, "Well, now you know why I'm investigating it, because it just doesn't seem right." And that's kind of where we left it. I will be getting back in touch with him with more questions that I have, because I just didn't get a chance. I wanted to ask him actually a couple more questions that were very pertinent but just ran out of time. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Kelly for doing this, because he actually put off a conference call he had with someone else to sit there with me for another 15 minutes to help, kind of wrap up where we were. Let me explain. He did over the autopsy reports with the gunshot wounds. This was really, really important. Where is that? Okay, and then, if I'm repeating myself, I'm really, really sorry. But he explained why it would be considered indeterminate. He stated that there are, I have to find that because it was made so much sense when he was telling me about that. Maybe I wrote it on the back of one of these pages. Yeah, I do that too, because I think it's really important that we understand how he explains the three. Oh, here we go. There are three types of terminology they use. Oh, it's so dry here. When they're writing up the reports. One being direct contact, where something is actually touching a certain part of the body. And then intermediate, where it's 2 to 3 feet away. And then distant, where there's no evidence other than the bullet. And intermediate, where it's 2 to 3 feet away, he says there will usually be gunpowder and stippling. And of course, with the gun press to the head, he said there will be stippling, gunpowder, and everything within that wound. And distant being the only thing they know, they can't say how far because the only thing they found was a bullet or a bullet fragment. He did state that on Renaya's, of course, somebody had a question, and actually a few people have had a question about how to determine the entrance wound versus the exit wound. And he stated that, I'm almost sure you said this. If you didn't, Dr. Kelly, please tell me that, because maybe I read this somewhere else. But with the entrance wound, there will be internal beveling of the, in this case, the skull, and the exit wound will be external beveling. So that's how they can tell the difference between the entrance wound and the exit wound. He said that, whose autopsy were we talking about? Oh, when they were describing, I think it was on Kamel's gunshot wound, when they were talking about how it entered and where it was located, where they were talking about, an inch from the head and a half inch from the shoulder. He said that report was written by an amateur, probably somebody in training, because what they stated made no sense at all. And it was not written correctly. And he said, in the sense of calling them indeterminate, he says since there wasn't any gunshot residue or anything, at least I don't think there was on the bodies, other than maybe, then that would be the correct term, would be intermediate. And he said that their decomp rate for all three bodies is the same thing that they say in here, is early to moderate. Again, he stated only about a week dead. And he did feel, he was very emphatic in stating that he felt the dog did indeed do some scavenging, but without seeing photos and actually being able to read the medical examiner's report, which is different than the autopsy report. he couldn't say for sure which part of the body was scavenged or whatever. But I did ask him, I said, well, what about the fractured rib? Because he said, well, this was before he actually saw the picture of the bodies. And he said, just by reading the reports, he said, well, yeah, a dog could take the arm. I said, okay, now let's look at the photo. And I said, well, what about her fractured rib? And he's like, not likely. So again, there's a fracture to a rib that doesn't explain anything. Does not explain. There's nothing there to explain how her rib got fractured. And I think that was pretty much all we talked about. He was also couldn't understand why they didn't do handwriting analysis, so that should have been done. And also he was curious on how the blood was actually located on the bullets and on some of the areas. He did say that just because there wasn't blood on the floor around where they were, he goes, that doesn't mean that's where they were shot. Okay, we've all said that too. However, with how they're laid, and at first he says it was, again, he said it was possible that David could have done this until I pointed out that I said, well, but the position of David's body will tell you a different story. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, in the police reports, as they're describing it, and I went and I read him that part where, at least I think I read him that part. I read him some parts, but it's in here, where it describes that David is laying there, and then Kamel and her sweater is laying on top of David's leg. And then that's when he goes, well, that shouldn't be. And I said, yeah, I know. And where the blood is located on the floor, and I'm not sure, I didn't do enough research yet on that to find out whose blood that was. But he said they were probably in a standing position and also at a low point where there's a low trajectory, because there's like spider going this way and then drops. So it's kind of a mixture. So they could have been standing and fell or something like that. But again, that doesn't make sense. He said dogs do lick up all the blood. I think that's my point I was getting to. And he showed me another photo of a body that had been eaten by this particular person's Labrador puppy. They called it a puppy, but I know Labrador dogs can be big, and I know how hard they bite. I've had one myself. So, but like I told him, I said, but that skull is still intact. The spine is still intact. All the soft tissues are gone, and I think most of the ribs were gone, but the skull is still completely intact. He said that could have been due to the fact that they believed that particular person died of a natural cause, but maybe the difference was because the Crowleys were shot in the head. Again, everything's speculation at this point because we don't have all of the information. So again, all in all, when he started off with a certain opinion after just reading the reports and then looking at the photo, but then as we're going through it more and more, and I start bringing out more of the questionable details that were bypassed, he wasn't quite as adamant anymore. He just got to the point where he's like, okay, yeah, there's not enough information for me to tell you one way or another. So I felt that was pretty hopeful, because it was no longer, asking, well, yeah, the gun is right there, and it was that gun that shot the bullets, and they're the only ones in the house. And I'm like, okay, but you have a back door that's been opened. You have a fight going on between the brothers, and you have another sister trying to stir up trouble and, yelling at them in another email. And then Kamel jumps in and says, hey, wait a second, we've had contact, and, you need to take it down a notch or two. But my interpretation, not hers, not necessarily what Kamel said. And I said there was, and they also mentioned to him that I think it's Detective Klonikos, who was the electronics device investigator, how he went through every device that they were, they could pull from the Crowley house, and he could find zero, no motive whatsoever. And he went all the way back, I think, to early to mid 2000s, and so he's telling Detective phone. He goes, I can't give you a reason. There's no motive here whatsoever. And there was some other, and again, he's not a detective. He just found that quite interesting. And I said, yeah. And I said, there's another guy who, Sean, I believe, was the one who owed the state of Minnesota like $38,000 in taxes, and how he's yelling at David saying, hey, you know what, why are you going to do this? Because you're going to send me to prison. And so the more information that Dr. Kelly was getting, like I said, it went from my take on how he was reacting. It went from, well, yeah, I'd say he did it, to not so sure. Not saying he did it, but I'm no longer saying he really did. So to me, it was great. It was good progress, and he answered a lot of my questions, and I think a lot of your questions as well. And the main thing being that until we can get better photos, he said he would like to see the actual photo of how the bodies actually were laying, the photo of how Kamel is laying, and how her sweater's on top of David's leg, and just things like that, because that's extremely important. He couldn't have been standing to shoot himself in the head and then have his leg end up underneath her sweater. So it's these little details you have to pull out and go, okay, we got to look into this. So all in all, I thought it was really good, and Dr. Kelly did say he would answer any more of my questions that I had, and I know I'll have more because it was so rushed and so much information, and he did his best to go into it in depth as much as he could, and he showed me different photos of dog scavenging, and what I saw in those photos, they didn't resemble what I saw in the Crowley home. However, he saw similarities. I mean, he's the medical examiner, but I didn't see that type of injury. And in the photos that he showed me, every part that was exposed, that was bare skin, but when the dog was involved, it was gone almost, with the exception of the lower half of the extremities. Waist on up, gone, down to the spine and the skull, gone. But the spine and the skull were there. So, which is totally different, because David had an exposed abdomen. Renee had a completely exposed abdomen. Her face was not touched. Her head was not touched. Yet David's and Kamel's heads are gone. So if any of you out there has better photos, or the one that especially shows how Kamel was lying on top of her hands, and how the bodies were actually from a different angle, not the angle we have, please send them to me, and my email address will be down below. Thank you, and hopefully that will explain a little bit more, and I hope you got as much out of that with Dr. Kelly as I did. And again, I really felt that he was being very, very, very helpful. However, we have to keep in mind his specialty is not forensics, but he has experience in this particular area, but it's not his expertise. So, and he was, clear to state that, and he was very clear to state that his opinion, and nobody's opinion will matter, what you think versus where your expertise lies, are two separate things. So, okay, thank you, Dr. Kelly, and I will be getting back in touch with you again, and I just, again, hope this helped you a little bit. And I think we're getting closer and closer to a resolution. And I'm now looking for handwriting experts. I'm going to be sending stuff off. Pay for it out of my own pocket if I have to, because I really think we have to do this with science. We have to prove one way or another. If he did it, it will be proven. If he didn't do it, it will be proven. I have my own take on it. And the more I look into this, and the more I investigate and research, the more I'm going down that path. But we'll leave that for another day. So we'll talk to you later.
Hi, everyone. This is Catherine Michelle, and we're here with Greg Fernandez Jr. and Sophia. And we are going to be giving you just a brief update on some information Sophia has brought forward, and it's stuff I just read today. And just want to kind of get you guys in the loop of what it is we're going to cover. We would cover tonight. They're ready. I am not. I just didn't have time to go over all of it. However, this information is vital, I believe, to the case, and it has to do with the phone records and the financial records of David and Camille Crowley. So, Sophia, could you please tell us what it is that you found?
Well, it was several things. I noticed it about a year ago, right after my hand surgery, and I was just sitting on the couch looking over files and everything. And let's go back into these files here. Some of the things that I noticed was that David stopped making phone calls in November. That he doesn't make any more phone calls or any more text messages. And I found that very odd because it wasn't lining up with what they were saying in the police report or what the friends were saying. And
can you tell us what?
Think.
Can you tell us what phone number that was?
It was to Midas.
But do you know? But I mean, which phone record? Like, what was David's phone number? Do you remember?
Let me go back here.
So I think that'll be really important because we have documents. We have documents on 4 phone numbers that are tied to David and Camille.
Let's see here.
And another thing that I'm going to look up here is also when did, and maybe either of you might know this too, when did Camille's father cut off their plan? Was it in October or November? I think that's why they have so many phones too.
I believe it was in October.
I think you're right on that.
And I need to go back and open these records up. Catherine, do you have anything open on your computer?
Yeah, I'm looking at the spreadsheets you created. And what is it that you wanted me to look at?
Actually, it was a member called Caleb. His name was Caleb, and he created these spreadsheets.
Oh, okay. Well, he did a fantastic job.
Right? He did an amazing job.
Yeah, I love them. They're great.
It's a great quick guide.
Now, we probably haven't spread out there as much as we should, I think. I don't know how many people have actually seen this.
Yeah, when Sophia sent it to me today, it was like the first time I'd seen it in this format, and I'm like, this is so much easier to read, right. And it's right in your face that communication stopped with both of them way before any issues supposedly arose with them. You know, it doesn't coincide with the last time anybody said they talked to them, or it doesn't coincide with the timeline of David writing that email to Jason Allen. Just nothing. The phone records don't jive with the rest of everything else.
And Camille had her last 2 phone calls were to Wells Fargo, and it was that day that the payment bounced for the mortgage. And her phone calls, I believe, were to the automated system because they were after hours. And she possibly could have been transferring money, only because they were after hours.
Maybe checking her balance.
That too, yeah.
Yeah, making sure the payment posted.
That's what I was thinking. Good Lord.
But this is where it got confusing for me, because there are 4 different phone numbers, and I do believe at least one of those there's phone records up until January.
Well, they're showing calls coming in to these phones, but they were not answered. When you look at the duration of the call, it is 0 seconds, 0 seconds. So a lot of calls are still coming in to both sets of phones that David and Kamel had, but there was no response from the other side.
Right.
And one phone he did have forwarded to his other phone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I have way too many files on this.
So I'm looking at page 42 of the 94 pages, and this is where it does show that that David or Kamel's dad did cut off this one particular phone in October.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish it would say the number. I think.
So if that's the case, then this spreadsheet and these phone records that we're looking at for December were on the phone that they had active. So the calls, when they stop communication, David stops communication in November, Kamel stops communication in December. So from that point on, these would be the only two phones that were working. And so according to these documents that are recorded and proof of their activity, there is zero activity from David starting from November 18th. Nothing. And when you look at his phone records before, he was quite active.
And he did call Chris Peck on the 18th also. Mm-hmm. That phone number for David is 612-999-4890.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's...
He called Midas on the 26th of November. That was his very last phone call.
What is Midas? Is that the gold?
I'm not exactly sure. I took it to Midas Auto.
I'd look into the gold. Midas is tied with Alex Jones. He used to be a sponsor for Alex Jones. Look that up.
That's a very good thought.
Yeah, and when I'm looking at this, though, when I saw that said call to Midas, we have no idea if David made that call or if someone else made that call. Because when his last call is on the 18th, and his mom then calls him 6 times on the 20th, a text from Rick on the 20th, 18 calls from Kate on the 21st, and a text from Dan Crowley on the 22nd, 2 calls from Kate on the 22nd, and then now all of a sudden there's a call to Midas on the 26th. Now his mom had been trying to reach him and Kamel. When you look at both of their phone records, Kate was calling them both all hours of the day and night, up to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, without any response.
Yeah.
From either of them. And this is totally eye-opening. And this is why we want you, the listeners, to be prepared. We're going to do a really in-depth show on this. And Sophia, could you tell us what led you down this path again? Could you complete that story and tell us how you ended up zeroing in on this information?
Oh, there's just so many things. When you look at the police reports, and I was looking at that, and I was checking his phone records, and things just weren't adding up. Because, for instance, you hear the brother say, well, I texted him in December. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to check the records to see if this happened. And December comes. I don't see anything from Dan Jr. in December.
No. Mm-mm.
At all. And I see 2 from Danny August Mason. I see something from Kate Crowley. And the other very interesting thing is no family calls them, either of them, at Christmas time.
Right. Nor on Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, holidays. Did it not mean anything for this family?
Yeah, when it says no calls placed or received for either person, David or Kamel, that was a huge red flag for me.
Now that's both of their phones that they had active at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And, I mean, we could play devil's advocate and say that stuff was done through Messenger. But it's not in the police reports either. And they made sure to show text messages from family or from, well, I mean, like for Camille, they showed all these message threads to her friend or to Allison.
Mm-hmm.
But they show nothing for Thanksgiving. They show nothing for Christmas or Christmas Day. Why isn't that in the police report? Wouldn't that be proof? Or how about actual proof, written form, that he actually contacted Chris Peck in December? Where's that text message? Why isn't there a screenshot added to the police report?
Right, because that was supposed to be the big where he supposedly went and bought weed, correct? And it was supposed to be done through a text message, but yet there's no proof of that. And not even on these phone records, you know, he calls him in November or texts him in November, call to Chris Peck 3 seconds. So that's, you know, what, you phone rings and they hangs up. It's like, really?
So that would be another thing to try to get, would be the exchange between David and Chris Peck, right? Because they got it from somewhere.
Yeah, because it shows Chris texted David on the 12th of November, and then David makes a 3-second phone call on the 18th of November. And then there's nothing until the 26th where it says a call to Midas, but we have no idea who made that call, because in between, his mom had been trying to reach him a lot.
Well, that's why
6 calls, and no response. Yeah.
Well, that's why I wonder if there is another phone after this one that David ended this phone service in November, because the police, you know, they say that going through David's phone record that they had that they, you know, that's where they learned about Chris Peck. So there's got to be something in there.
Warrant,
well, then it would mean that he
only
had
show
3 phone numbers. Yeah.
And
all the records only show 2, correct?
No, he has 4.
Each.
There's 4 numbers total.
No, 2 for Kamel, 2 for David,
Gotcha.
not for each, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And
2
that's
for
what
each.
the search warrants show.
Yes. Yeah.
And if there's another phone out there, they did not obtain those records legally because it's not in the search warrant. I could be wrong, but
so in all 4 of the phone records that we have 4 PDFs. In all 4 of those, there's no call made on what date is this? On December 19th, 2014 at 7:22 a.m. to Chris Peck from David Crowley?
No.
We have the actual phone number here. Well, I'm going to look this up. This is one of the reason when I first got these 94 pages, I personally redacted people's phone numbers and where people lived. And now it's coming back to haunt me because now I got to look at the unredacted ones.
I believe that the number that you are seeing is Chris Peck's phone number.
Oh, okay. So where it says was given some information that a text message was sent from David Crowley's phone to a phone number of. Oh, okay. So that's just Chris Peck's number, not. That should help too, though, I guess. And this is weird. Now rereading it on page 28 of the 94 pages. This is written by Tommy Booth. On 1/19/2015, Detective Shane Klokonis had given me some information that a text message was sent from David Crowley's phone to a phone number of which belonged to Chris Peck. So this isn't even saying that they looked at a phone record So this Detective Shane Klaukonis should be the one who obtained the phone records, and what he's telling Detective Tommy Booth on 119 should have been based on the phone records, unless it's based on some hearsay, which is possible too. Maybe an informant trying to throw Chris Peck under the bus.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of this stuff is just, it's like it's falling into place now, when looking at these phone records and talking to all the professionals that all of us have spoken with, to me it's like, and I could be way off base, doesn't mean I'm telling the truth, or I'm not lying on purpose. I could be wrong, or I could be mistaken. But this, from the moment you look at the scene, it seems staged. But now with all of this, it was not only staged, but it was pre-planned. And, I'm just like, wow, it's mind-boggling.
It is. And then you hear people say, well, the proof is in the police reports. The proof of his guilt is in the police reports, but it's not. It absolutely is not. And if there was proof of this transaction between Chris Peck and David, they would have included it.
Well, yeah,
not unless they're forced to, right? Not unless we force them to.
Well, no, because if they're listing all of the calls, when they're getting the information, when they put in the search warrant and they requested the documents from the phone companies, the phone company isn't going to sit there and go, oh, wait, let's hold that one out. Because, on the 13th of November, it shows that David texted Kamel.
Right.
It shows that, and it shows that David's getting text, but it does not show that David ever sent a text or a call to Chris Peck in December at all. So that thing about him doing that, and they picked up the weed on the 19th or whatever, it's just at this point, according to the information they sent, yes, it's a story, it's a lie, it's fabricated, which just goes like, wow. Where are the lies going to stop in this case? Oh.
And then the other thing that really, really gets to me is in the documentary, David's father states that David was struggling for money. And this is absolutely not true. You look at his financial records, he had money. Kamel was not holding that family up. David had money of his own.
Yes.
And that is another lie that is being put out there by this documentary, and the family is supporting it.
And that's frustrating because, when you're looking at his financials and he has a 6-figure credit limit, you can't have that if you don't have money. And the fact, I think we were talking about this earlier too, the family's obviously very well off. I know very wealthy people myself, and it is a yearly thing, or as often as they need to, they gift family members the legal amount, which I believe at that time was probably the $14,000, which is why his dad wrote him that check, because you can do that at one time, gift somebody. It's either one time or that amount within a year. I can't remember. But then it's a gift. It's tax deductible for the giver, but not taxed and by the receiver. So this is something that had been going on for a long time. And $14,000, it's not a drop in the bucket. I mean, maybe for people who are really rich, but if they were struggling like they're trying to convince us they were, $14,000 would have meant the difference between keeping their home and losing it. So they weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination. And looking at all of their mortgage payments, other than the goof up when the money didn't hit the bank in time, but even then they were able to fix that right away. And so bills were always paid. Credit cards were often paid in advance. There was a credit on the statement because another purchase would be coming in, so they were trying to offset what was going to be charged. These were not people who were struggling.
And let me be clear, his minimum payment could have been maybe $50, $75. He was paying $2,000, $3,000 sometimes for a minimum payment. And when it was only supposed to be $50 to $75.
Right.
So this really, really is an eye-opener when you look or when you think about the whole lie of them struggling financially.
Yeah, it totally
It's
blows that
true.
completely out of the water. Yeah, it's not true in the slightest, you know. And I'm telling you, when I'm still kind of like overwhelmed by all the stuff you sent and reading this and looking at it. It takes a while to sink in, and I'm just like going, wow, there is zero proof. And the more that they've given us, to me, and the way I'm viewing it, the more it appears to me that they were totally set up. This was an ongoing event for quite some time. This was not a snap or spur of the moment murder. This was planned out and done in stages.
Could this have started with the 2012 trailer? Because that always felt like there's lots of red flags back in 2012. 2012 was a crazy year, and I wondered if David was set up, could have started around, well, I mean, the trailer came out in 2012, so earlier than that. But I think it might have been focused, one of the theories, right, is that it was focused around that time. Could it have came later? Sure, but we're all talking about the same people who were part of that script, so.
Yeah, and it just makes so much sense that, you know, those who were saying that David was pulling away from them, I think he found something out about them. I think he discovered whatever that truth may be, and we may never know, but it cost him his life. Yeah, it cost him his life. It cost his family their life. And, you know, he found something. And this was like I said, it feels like it was a long time planned because it was so overdone and not done correctly, that this was just not something you could sit down and go, okay, wait, now you go do that. Wait, I'm going to go do this. You know, we have 2 hours to set this scene.
This also could have started when David was in the service too. Could have been some payback for something there.
The murderers could have done it for almost any reason. The scene looks like they initially set it up as a hate crime and then went back and overdid it with that bullet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they were to take the focus, you're right, and make it like a hate crime by writing on the wall, but obviously they were too stupid to realize that, you know, true killings are not. I have never, and I've read up on a lot, and I've talked to a lot of people from that country who've been over there, and not once has anybody ever seen, or have I seen, when an honor killing was done, that they ever wrote in that person's blood on the wall. That was such a faux pas on their part, it wasn't even funny. I'm like, wow, that was, to me, that's like Hollywood staging, a wannabe actor, a wannabe director. So here, let's do this because everybody will think that. And right away, it's like, no, you just gave yourself up.
Well, they're still giving themselves up.
Yeah, I agree. So,
and it's just not there. The proof is not there of guilt at all. All the excuses that they have given can be debunked by these records.
Yeah.
And just like, and I know I keep harping on this, the alcohol. If David was driven to a murder-suicide because of alcohol, and if there was alcohol in that house, the police would have photographed it.
Yes.
Yeah, that would have fit their script, for sure.
Exactly. And it's just not there. There is no photographs of that whatsoever. There's not even a photograph of alcohol like sitting around. There's no bottles, no beer cans, nothing.
Yeah, and most people I know who drink, they'll have a 12-pack or something in their garage, as well as having some in the fridge, but they always have a stash in the garage. And you see his whole garage, and I see no, like you said, no evidence of alcohol at all. Nothing.
it's just not there. And so that's just another fabricated lie.
And it was like they had to keep changing their stories. The stories kept changing. I think it's because a lot of people kept asking questions, kept asking real questions. And as those real questions came up, they had to pivot. And you don't have to pivot if you're telling the truth. The truth is the truth. And I think that's what raised a lot of eyebrows, and I think that's why there's so many people still so invested, whether privately or publicly. A lot of people are still invested into this case, and it's getting bigger. And a lot of people, especially either military, whether they're current, past, present, or future, seems to hit them a little hard. Seems to hit them really hard, because that could be them.
Because, yeah, and the movie is implying that David snapped because of military service. And that seems to insult all of us veterans.
Yes.
It should. It definitely should insult you all, because it's
there's no proof that there's PTSD either.
Right.
He wasn't medically discharged from the military. It would say right there on his DD-214.
Mm-hmm.
I used to type these up when I was in the military. It's not there. Mine says service connected. But...
And we do know he was receiving a small disability from the VA, but he was also in a vehicle that was hit by an IED. And so, he was injured when the bomb went off in the vehicle they were in. But that had nothing to do with suffering PTSD to the extent that he had to go seek counseling. And the military never even said, hey, I think he has issues. Because if someone's having issues, the military has no problem saying, okay, they need to go talk to a psychiatrist. But that was never the case with any of the records I've seen on David. And again, the disability pay was associated with his injury. And it wasn't a very big injury, because you could see him walking and stuff like that, but he still got, some disability. And it did not affect his ability to do his day life, and let alone write that script. I mean, that takes a lot of mental focus. And he was able to do that nonstop and work for weeks at a time. And someone with PTSD couldn't do that.
Right. People would have noticed.
Yeah.
He was out in what, 2009 or something? I forget. Yeah, 2009. It's like 4 years. So no.
It really could have been about anything, and he was getting, I think it was $400 and something. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, very much.
That's a very low percent. I'm thinking maybe 20 or 30 at the most. And he had a child, and he was married, so I'm thinking possibly 20%. And so I receive 100%, and my children are 18 and above. So I know that.
Yeah, see, you know about it. You know how it works.
Mhm. And it's he really could have been raking in a lot more if it was severe PTSD, especially if it was severe enough to cause him to snap.
Right.
So, plus, it's not written anywhere in the police reports that he had PTSD.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you, being in the military, you personally have seen and know what it looks like when someone is suffering from a bout of PTSD. Now, when we were in Fort Bragg, and my husband at the time was stationed over there, and that was when a plane crashed on the tarmac and it hit a C-5, and there were a bunch of soldiers that were burned. Some of them died. Some of them were severely burned. And these guys are coming in, and as they're coming into the ER, I am telling you, when someone suffers that something that is truly PTSD, you see it. they don't function in the same way as someone without PTSD. I mean, there is a huge cognizant difference. There's, and these guys would just sit there and just stare at you, and they wouldn't even talk. And some of them did okay. Others, they never spoke a word after that accident. But then you look at David, and not only is he writing a script, but he's doing trailers. He's making film. He's going out and he's promoting. He's pitching his movie to Hollywood. This guy is more than functioning at a more than competent level, and on an extended period of time.
Just going back 1 second to the PTSD, on page 32, PTSD is actually mentioned, but it's told that David's friend, Mitch Heil, says that David did not have PTSD.
Correct.
He did not believe that David had PTSD or was suffering from PTSD, which makes me think that the police asked him and not that he just volunteered this.
Yeah, and Mitch Heil would know, because wasn't that his longtime friend from grade school?
Yes.
And that they actually went into the service together.
Yeah.
They went to basic training together. Right. Yeah, he's been the only one, I think, that from my view, his story has stayed consistent. Everything that his story to me, I have not seen it waver. I have not seen it. He's always thought David was guilty, but he thinks that it was this whole Gray State project. But he's never one, at least I haven't seen it yet, where where his story has changed to the point where it's just like he's definitely lying. I haven't seen that yet. I see it with a lot of other people, but not him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, these records, they bring up so many more questions. Just when you think you're going to get answers, you get something else that just brings up 100 more questions. And that's what's so frustrating about this case.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Like when I first saw that today, and it's like, that's why I wrote an email. I said, please excuse my French. It was just like, I had to say something because it was like such a shock. And I'm like, how long have you known about this? And you're like, for about a year now. I'm like, oh, we have to tell everybody. This has got to get out there. The phone records and everything don't match with the official's narrative.
And I've been saying something this whole time. It's just nobody really picks up on it, or it just doesn't translate right when you're writing it down on the internet. And so, thank you, Catherine.
No, you're welcome. It's like I told you. It's like I've listened to every one of the videos you've done with Greg, and this never came across to me. I never got the gist of it. So when I saw it today, and I'm like, wait, why hasn't this been said? And when you're like, but I have said something, and I'm like, okay, but my brain didn't pick up on it. So, I mean, I think a lot of us just didn't pick up on it. It just went right over our heads. And when you start to realize that David stopped all communication on mid-November, Kamel stops all communication December, and we know those bodies, and I will stand by this until the day I die, those bodies were not in that house for 3 weeks. Those bodies were only dead for maybe up to 10 days at the most. And so where were they? What was going on? Who was controlling their movements? What was happening to this family? And to David? Why wasn't David in communication with Kamel between the time he stops communication and then Kamel stops communication? There's not even any proof that they even called or talked to each other, where before they would make phone calls or text each other. But then nothing. It all stopped.
Another thing about the documentary, and I clearly remember this, is they're talking about David constantly calling Kamel's phone number. But
yeah, and we know that's a
lie. And you don't see it.
Yeah.
You just do not see it.
It's a flat-out lie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what in that documentary was true? Nothing that I could find so far. Okay,
And
that's just me being
after
smart.
seeing all this, I even asked Greg flat out. I was like, what do we know about David and Camille that hasn't been told in the documentary? What do we know about them? And you have to think about it. It's like everything that we know about him has been from the documentary or from the family. But you go back to the records, and anything that has been stated, whether it was the documentary or through family interviews, the majority of it is disinformation. Mm-hmm. It can be debunked by the facts, and the facts are the police records. Whether it is information that they got from the phone companies, for instance, the phone records, or the credit report, or, I know a lot of people really don't realize this, but there was a mortgage company that was in contact with David, and it was in Ocean View, I believe, and he received 2 credit checks. I believe either it was in November or December, and then again in January, after they supposedly passed away. And with that credit report, I would hazard a guess that they probably would have been approved through this mortgage company. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's planning for the future.
Right. And a big future that includes moving states. That is not somebody who's going to go off the deep end and just snap all of a sudden and be so despondent.
Mm-hmm. And it just infuriates me that they expected us to take this documentary as gospel and to believe everything in it and stop asking questions. They made a documentary on these people's lives, and now we are being told to stop asking questions, mm-hmm. that it's not our business. You just lied about these people over and over, and now you're asking us to stop asking questions? It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
You guys put everything out publicly.
Yeah, and it's like they're mad because we're asking questions, because this is like the ones who actually killed this family. It's like they were so inept and so stupid to make so many ridiculous mistakes. And it's the same thing with the documentary. They think that because they pull the wool over their own eyes, they think everybody else is as stupid as they are, and they're going to believe it. And the vast majority of people who watch that documentary are going, oh, wait a second, there's something really wrong. You guys didn't do this right.
And it doesn't add up. Their reactions don't add up. Mm-mm. And, I mean, like 1 or 2, you could probably think, oh, they're still grieving. It's very possible that they took medication, and that's why they're a little off. But it's everybody.
Right.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that is never mentioned in that the whole documentary, one of the biggest things that is never mentioned is that Camel's side of the family pulled out of the documentary, did not want to be part of it. So they knew that this documentary was crap even before it ever aired.
Yeah. And they're not about to say, like you said, they're not about to tell anybody that.
No.
They just, bypass it and hope nobody asks the questions. But it's like, yeah.
But why isn't Camel's family telling, they need to really step it up. They really need to step it up because they know what's up. They mm-hmm. gotta know what's up.
Yeah, and it's like I was saying before, it comes across to me that where the families are concerned, it's like the Stockholm syndrome. They're best friends with people who may or may not have had a part in this, or know somebody, or may not know somebody who had a part in this. And because you can't accept that type of brutality, it's just like, kidnap victims. They, will protect the person who's harmed them. And in this case, it's like they're protecting everybody who has said some pretty horrible things about their family.
I mean, can you imagine joking about your friend's murder?
No.
And I mean, just some of the messages that were posted that either Mason Hendricks had said or, other people connected to this case have said, and it's very possible that they could have been sarcastic, but the low, just the tackiness of it, and talking about the blood and writing on the wall, and it's horrible. How could you joke about stuff like that? These are your friends.
Yeah.
That you supposedly care so much about. And you're sitting there making jokes about it. And it's very crass.
Yeah, and I don't find it remotely funny at all. And I don't even, even if it's sarcastic or even done out of frustration, that would have still been the last thing anybody would have joked about.
Mm-hmm.
And this was which Mason? Mason Hendricks?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the guy who told me that he wanted to become a cop. He had a degree in law enforcement. He wanted to work with the troubled youth. We found out that the cops are all, there's too many reasons why he couldn't do that. And that's the path of an informant. Now, I'm not accusing Mason Hendricks of being one, but, he was on the right path to be set up to be compromised to actually be one. And if he really wanted to work with troubled youth, then he should have put more time into this case and investigated why a 5-year-old was killed. If he really cares about the troubled youth, there's your troubled youth. The troubled youth that aren't here now. David was a troubled youth. They all had their own things going on. But if you really care, then you would want to know what the truth is. You would not give up. You'd read the documents. He didn't read them all. You look at everything that you possibly could. You can't tell me that you know more than me if you haven't read everything that I've read, and it's all public stuff.
Right, and that's so frustrating when they do that. They're like going, "Oh, you guys just don't know," and you're like, "Yeah, we're the ones who are reading everything."
And then in the documentary, they painted Kamel as a battered wife.
Yeah.
But there's absolutely no proof of that. And as I said, David is not calling her phone nonstop, obsessively like they stated. And if Kamel acted that way, if she did at work where she supposedly ducked out through the back, could there have been a different reason, or if it even happened? You take a lot of things and just the different things that were said in the documentary, and you have to just throw it out after you read the proof and all the records, because it's just not true. It was propaganda.
Can you picture if they would have been able to make it seem like Kamel was involved in some type of pact to kill her kid? I think even less people would think that David Crowley was guilty. That's where they were going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and none of that makes sense at all. I mean, not only does the crime scene not support that theory, but who they are as parents and how much they love that little girl. No. That was just, they were grasping for straws, throwing out a million different of their ideas, hoping somebody would latch on to something.
Right.
Well,
and
a few people did latch on to it.
They did, I'm sure. The problem they have with this whole hate crime thing is, they've basically muddied those waters now, because it's not a hate crime, but it's in those stats. David did not, there's no proof that David was abusive to his wife, but he's in those stats too. he's in these stats that he should not be of. And at some point, somebody has to question, well, if he's in them, how do we know that the other stats are true? And there are real hate crimes, and there are real people that do beat up on their spouses and their kids and do horrible things. And so when we're talking about that, it's so serious that you can't just jump to that conclusion because you want to, because that puts you back into your safe zone. Because all you're doing is just lying to yourself and then lying to everybody else.
Yeah, and when they were bringing up the old David was abusive, and when I found out he was on that list, for domestic violence, I've said this before. I have been a victim of domestic violence. I know what those people are like. He doesn't fit any of the criteria, and the fact that you have somebody who's innocent and you're putting them on a list, making them out to be the villain when the real perpetrators are out walking free, I have a big problem with that. Huge problem with that.
Yeah. And you're not the only one to say that, Catherine. That last conference call that you all had, the really long one, there was another domestic violence survivor who came on and said the same exact thing. She said, I'm a survivor, and I know what an abuser looks like, and David didn't come off as that.
Yeah. I mean, I knew right away that was not true when I saw how he responded, and I've said this a million times, how David responded when the person that was with Eric Sayward, the guy behind the camera, going, oh, where's your daughter? I want to meet your daughter. And David positions himself. He blocks that guy's view of his family. And he's like, no, they're not feeling safe right now. And I'm like, I'm surprised David didn't deck the guy, to be honest with you, because that was just so creepy and uncalled for. And usually with abusers, they don't care. They don't want to protect their family. It's not about that. I mean, they're highly aggressive and volatile, and there's nothing I've seen about David in any respect. And not to say he never got angry, because that's crazy, but just his whole demeanor is not one of someone who has that history of domestic violence.
And I need to come out on the record for this. For those going around and saying that there is a journal out there with proof of this, then if that's what you're going by as your proof, you guys need to show it.
Yep.
We are giving evidence, as you guys have demanded so many times. We're giving you proof that David is innocent. We're giving you proof and debunking your lies. Now, if you're claiming that there is a journal out there stating that David was an abuser, you guys need to prove that. You need to show it. And it has to be written in his handwriting. I'm not going to take this computer-generated day one stuff, because that can be edited. You can go back at any time and write whatever you want. I know, because I downloaded that app and tested that theory.
Yeah, I would also add that anybody that says that there is any other journal out there, that the cops are saying that there is not.
Okay, see, and that's good to know too. So then the police right there are saying that they're lying.
Yep.
The police would know.
We have that in writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can just toss that out the window right now. Whoever's saying that there's a journal, they're lying, because the police are flat out said that's not true.
And now the question is, why are they lying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they put a spotlight on themselves. They're not victims. They're inserting themselves and actually making themselves suspicious persons involved in this case. Whether it's after the fact, it's fine. We can all say it's after. But whatever. They're still inserting themselves, and they shouldn't.
Yeah, all seriousness. If they don't want the spotlight on them, then stay out of it.
Yeah.
Don't be adding to this info.
Move stage right.
Yes. Oh, man.
You can't sit there and give disinfo and taunt people who are actually looking into this case and then play the victim. You cannot have it both ways. It
Right.
doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
Okay, anything else before we wrap up here and
No, I just
come back for a part 2?
Yeah, we'll come back for a part 2 for sure when I have more time to be better prepared and stuff, but this was just so last minute, and thank you guys for actually jumping on board and joining in and getting this out there. But I just think it's something that everybody should be prepared for and know, because this is so important, and I can't believe that the police and nobody else has put this together. So thank you, Sophia, for getting this, for finding this, and for bringing it to our attention.
You're welcome. And it wasn't.
We've been talking about this for doing this show for a while, so I'm glad we finally got the time to. But go ahead, Sophia.
Well, it wasn't just me. I mean, there were other people who pointed this out to me also, and so.
Yeah, who's the guy that put the?
Kudos
that's
to all
Caleb.
of you.
I believe it was Caleb Sanders.
Okay.
That put the phone records together. And then there was Christy, who I've done a lot of long late night chats with, going over these records and rehashing this whole case over and over and over. And Lee. So it wasn't just me. It was other people included.
Kudos to everybody, because this is amazing.
Absolutely.
Well,
and that's what it takes. That's why it's so important to get so many eyes, so many people on this case as possible, because it can't just be 1 or 2 or 3 people. We need everybody to help out as much as you can and do whatever you can.
I agree.
Well, thank you, Greg. And I want to tell everybody, go out there, read the records. Don't take everything from that documentary as face value, or things that people connected to this case have to say at face value. You go out there and you research it yourself. You'll see the answers. You'll see the disinfo. So please research it. Look, it's there.
Amen.
And thank you, Greg and Catherine. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
All right, good peeps. Until we meet again.
Until then, you guys have a good night.
All right, you too.
Good night.
Okay.